let's get to our interior offensive line. I'm starting this off with Shelton, and you brought in Shelton to be a zone run blocker, and that's what he's going to do. I mean, honestly, his gap numbers, his PFF grade in gap concepts came in strong, and he blocked more gap last year. Like Sean McVay took a hard turn towards a lot more duo last
Mm.
year and some more gap concepts. And he blocked well in the gap concepts too. A lot of that's probably as a polar because he's a tenacious polar. He is an athlete who can move.
Yeah, he is an athlete. That was the one thing I think that jumped off the film watching him after the Bears acquired him during, the free agency period was he's an athletic center. And I think in today's NFL, that's just more required than it ever was before, where, your center largely was a guy who could just pivot right and pivot left. And that's how you blocked, right? You were a backside blocker in a lot of instances, unless it was a zone concept. Now the center position is asked to do so much more in the NFL that you do have to truly be more of an athlete at the center position. So I think Coleman Shelton was a great addition for a large variety of reasons. Obviously, he's got familiarity with the McVay scheme, and certainly Waldron has concepts of that built into his offense as well. And the numbers are certainly encouraging. I mean, he very clearly is brought in to be competition, right? If it was going to be Bates' job, I don't think they ever bring in Coleman Shelton. I think this was designed on purpose so where that, at the end of the day, you have 4 offensive linemen that can play 3 spots and all be capable starters, between your 2 guard spots and the center spot. And obviously, Shelton being more of a center, it doesn't mean that, he could potentially move to guard in a pinch if you absolutely need it.
Shelton graded out at 88.4 as a zone run blocker, and that's got to be near the top of the league. Like, I can't imagine there were many centers who graded out much better than that as a zone blocker. Like
Yeah.
those are some serious numbers right there.
Yeah, the only one I could probably bet any kind of level of money on that might have outdone him was maybe a Kelsey, but that's about it. I mean, I think the center position in football is it's so underappreciated. And of course, this is coming from a guy that largely played mostly center in his lifetime. But I mean, these guys are athletes. He already has to do a lot as a center. Hell, in old fake ball coach's offense here back in the good old days, the centers were asked to pull. We were pullers in that offense, and I think you're starting to see it a lot more.
So he ranked 15th in run block grade overall, but 5th in zone run block
centers.
Grade. Yeah, among centers.
Is that just among centers? Okay.
Yeah. So, I mean, there's something there to say if you have Shelton starting, you can feel pretty confident about your zone run blocking game because at the same time, you've got Teven Jenkins next to him, assuming good health. But Jenkins, one of the best guards as a run blocker. I mean, so in zone run blocking, he was 5th amongst guards at 85.7 for grade. He was actually pretty rough as a gap blocker. I imagine a lot of that comes down to assignment soundness from some teammates and some other stuff. I don't remember a lot of tape from him where I'm going, Teven, what are you doing? And that's what that grade says I should be seeing. But I did see a fair amount of that from the center position, from the other guard position, and some moments where it was Tev and Darnell Wright are next to each other. Darnell Wright's inside shoulder is completely shot, and Tev's having to pick up a lot of slack for Darnell at that point. I can't really blame Darnell there. I'm not going to sit there and tell Teven he did a bad job when he's covering for stuff like that. So I wonder how much that's factoring into the grade there. But outside of that, Teven was the dude last year when he was on the field. I thought. I mean, outside of the Week 18 game, like you can see the charts down here. These are my grades for these 2 players, Teven and Nate. Throughout the season, I went and watched every snap, graded every snap. The blue line is pass blocking. The orange line is run blocking. And the gray line is overall grade, which is also impacted by penalties. But you can see pretty clearly there. Teven was consistently grading above 70 for me on the season. He even peaked into the 80s at times. And I think he even had a 290 grades in there where he was playing at an all-pro level, I really do think, last year.
Yeah, he was a true treat to watch. And I think he probably could have gotten a nod at all pro had just the health maybe been a little bit better. And, I think if the Bears were a little bit better, it might have brought a little more notoriety to what he was doing. But I agree with you, man. I mean, Teven Jenkins was that dude for the Bears in every facet of the offensive line game on a unit that was largely insufficient at a lot of the other positions. So he stood out like a sore thumb, but for mostly good reasons because of what he was able to do in both the run and pass game.
The thing that really stood out to me about Teven last year, we know he can run block. We
Oh,
all
shit.
know he can run block. He can pancake a guy. He can do some stuff athletically that a lot of guards in the NFL can't because he's so big and athletic. Like his size is special for a guard, and
Yes.
that's part of the appeal of playing him at guard is he is a difference maker there. But pass protection up until last year had been a question for him at guard.
Mhm.
And man, last year I thought he was better in pass pro than he was as a run blocker. PFF didn't agree with me, but I thought that he was a borderline elite pass protector last year with some of the stuff that he was being asked to do, the way that they were asking him to cover blitzes was borderline insane. Like they'd tell him, get the first guy, push him far enough so he's out of the picture, and then go get the second guy
Yeah.
instead of rotating. Like they didn't have the center coming to pick up the guy much of the time. It was a lot more of just Teven figure it out. Like,
Just do what
just
you can
insane.
do. Yeah.
And he did it. He did it pretty consistently. Like I thought his pass blocking hit a different level for him last year, and I I have a feeling that Teven is going to be one of the best guards in the NFL this year. Like he wants to make money, right?
Yes, he does.
All he has is a second round contract, which is nothing to scoff at, but it's nowhere near the deal that Robert Hunt just got, the deal that Kevin Dotson just got. I think
Yep.
Tevin's better than either of those guys. I don't think he's been as consistent, but I think when he's on, he is better than either of those football players. And they're good football players. Don't get me wrong. I thought what we saw from Teven last year, if he could do that for 16 games, he's going to be a very rich man this time next year.
1000%. I think everybody around the league knows that too, what he can bring and what he can do. It really is. Again, for him, it's just the best ability that he needs to work on is being available. I mean, that really is the biggest knock in his game right now, especially after his third season now in the NFL in 2023. I agree with you. If he does what he did last year or slightly better over the course of maybe he misses one game, we'll call it, maybe two. So he plays at least 15 games of the 17 game slate. I 1000% agree with you. Whether it's with the Bears or with somebody else, he's going to be handsomely paid by someone for what he can do on the football field.
I hate that I'm saying this. A part of me just doesn't expect it to be with the Bears. But
I tend to agree.
let me ask you this. What do you think Teven needs to do to convince Ryan Poles to pay him a top of the market guard contract this season?
Stay healthy.
Yeah.
That's really all it is. That's nothing more. Like I think, I mean, Ryan Poles was one of the biggest reasons why Teven Jenkins got moved to guard in the first place. I think he saw what the potential was there with Teven being an interior offensive lineman at the next level rather than trying to make him into a tackle that he just wasn't at the NFL level. That they did that intentionally. They knew what kind of football player he could be inside because of that nasty nature that he brought to the game. I'm sure they would love to pay him, but if you can only stay on the field for 12 of 17 or 11 of 17 games every season, you're not going to get paid like a top guard in the NFL. Look at guys like Zach Martin, right? I mean, that dude's on the field every single Sunday and then some.
Doesn't miss
If
time.
he does not, and that's why he's paid so big. Quentin Nelson's the same way, right? And that's why those guys got top of the market dollars. If Teven can play, like I said, if Teven misses a game or two, shit happens, right? But like if he's on the field for at least 15 games this year, I think that's exactly what Ryan Poles needs to see in order to pay him top dollar for being an offensive guard.
Yeah, absolutely. And moving on to a Nate Davis. And Davis, I thought he played somewhat better than his PFF grade for multiple weeks. Like PFF really did not like his season. And I didn't like his season either. I didn't think he was a 26 true pass block grade. Like I had most weeks, I had his grades for pass blocking The first 3 weeks of the season were his 3 best games of the year, as far as I was concerned, where I had him at 68, 69, 69. Nice number
Nice.
there. And then Minnesota game, I had him down at 41, which is ugly.
Oof.
And to be clear, I don't think my grading system goes quite as low as easily as PFF's does either. Like it doesn't go as high as easily or as low. It's a little more forgiving. But and then 62, 68, 61, and then a 39 against Cleveland, 60, 60, and a 51 against Green Bay. So it was very up and down by both standards. I really liked what I saw the first 3 games of the season from him. PFF did not, if I remember correctly, that they thought he was rougher than I did. But I was putting a little more blame on Lucas Patrick for a few things than I think PFF was. But ultimately, I think Nate Davis is going to have a nice bounce back year. I don't think it's going to be a Pro Bowl year. I don't think it's going to be a year where you're like, we got to keep this guy. But I think it's going to be a year where if the Bears decide to move on from him, he still has 20 teams calling him about a starting spot, because that's the position he's in right now. So right now he's 27 and a half. He'll be 28 and a half when he's looking for a 1 year, $4 million deal. He's going to be pushing 30 when he's trying to get another real contract. So this is a contract year for him for all intents and purposes.
100%.
He needs to perform. And at the end of the day, too, the guy was 26 years old and his mom passed away right before the season last year. That's going to mess with anyone.
100%.
That's going to mess anyone up out there. And I think it had to have factored into his play, his practice habits, his real life, his mental health.
No, I was just gonna say you absolutely nailed it on the head. I think last year just the offensive line in general was a work in progress for the Bears. You had a rookie right tackle, you had a second-year left tackle, you had a guy that had history of injury issues with Jenkins. Patrick was just not what the team needed a year ago at the center position, and then you factor in the things with Davis, and I think too some of that pressure of being the $33 million man to come into Chicago and be that highest paid offensive lineman on the team. I mean, that comes with some pressure as well, especially in a market like with the Chicago Bears. So I'm expecting a bounce back year from Davis. Like you said, I'm not expecting necessarily a Pro Bowl season or an all pro season or anything of that nature. But to your point, right, in a season where I do very much think he's probably a cap casualty, especially if they want to pay a guy like Jenkins or they want to pay some other position in either the offensive or defensive line, I think he will have a good enough season where maybe it's not 20 teams calling him, but maybe it's 15 teams calling him about a starting position at one of the 2 guard spots because of the type of year he had. I think he can get to that. He's shown he can do it. It's just a matter of getting the deal done. And I think having a scheme that'll fit, and there's so many variables that go into it, but I expect Davis to have a bounce back year.
Yeah, I mean, you look at his 3 years prior to last year, he was one of the better zone blocking run blockers in the league. Like he was probably a top 15 guard probably top 20 every year the last 3 years prior to last year as a zone blocker. And then last year his PFF grade in zone blocking fell to 56. Like I think that there is a lot to grow there. And if a Coleman Shelton's at center, his job's gonna get easier as his own blocker, and he might be
100%.
really good at it. Like I mean, you think back to Tennessee, who's playing next to Aaron Brewer, I think it was, who's one of the best zone blocking centers in the league, but very similar concept there of, hey, he played next to that guy. That guy was really good at it. He's really good at it. Our interior line becomes a really strong zone blocking unit.
And I was going to say, I think that's the only downfall with individual grades for offensive linemen. It's so much of the line is as a 5-man unit. It's not about one individual man. Maybe a little bit more in pass set, I would say. It's more about the individual and, are they getting beaten by a rush move and things of that nature. But especially in zone, it's a little different if it's inside zone, because you're working stacks, you're working double teams, things of that nature. When you're working outside zone, especially, it truly is a 5-man unit, and it's communication based and things like that. If the center can't get the job done and cross the face of the guy that the guard needs to get up to, he's going to be in no man's land, and that's going to look bad on him, even though it might not directly be his fault. So I think that's something that plays into it as well. And to your point, right? If you have Coleman Shelton playing next to him, I bet you just by default of having a higher quality, a running mate effectively at center, that's going to bring that grade up immensely next season.
And if it's Ryan Bates at center, I still feel pretty good about it because I watched a few games of him at center. I gotta say I'm a little underwhelmed with his center tape, but I still feel pretty good about the ability for him to be a solid zone blocker, especially like you're talking outside zone, like you said, the ability to get out of your stance and get in front of a defender who's crossing your face. There were one or two instances on tape where I felt like Bates struggled with that, but I think that was more about the defender being really good than Bates not being good enough, because Bates is very similar to Coleman Shelton, where he's a very plus athlete who is twitchy up to the second level and twitchy out of his stance. He should be able to cover that well enough to get the time to for the guards to get clear, for him to be able to get in position to at least stalemate guys, and not get blown up as a zone outside zone run blocker. On inside zone, I think both these guys are a little. They're gonna, like I said, twitchy at the second level. Both Shelton and Bates, twitchy at the second level. They're gonna get up there. They're gonna get in the linebacker's face. I wish that Bates, I kept feeling like maybe I think I called it a grip issue when I put it out on Twitter. I'm not sure if that's the right way to put it. I wish that he packed a little more punch, I think, at the second level, because there were just a few times where it was like second level, some of it was at the line of scrimmage where it was just he didn't get his guy out of position. And I was speaking with someone on Twitter about it, and they're like, well, yeah, it's zone blocking. They just need a stalemate. It didn't sit right with me, that comment, because it was like, yeah, but you want to define the run lane. You want to get some horizontal movement. He's not being an imposing presence to the man in front of him. He's just getting in the way. And that guy is tossing him at times to ruin a play. And sure, some of it's on the running back, some of it could be on the quarterback if running back going in the wrong running lane or quarterback starting to scramble. But it was just a hand usage tendency that I didn't love, that I saw from Bates, that I thought Shelton did a much better job of as a run blocker.
He needs to get into a better run fit as a second level, especially as a second level blocker. That's what it is. Because you're talking about grips, right? I mean, that's what you're taught as an offensive lineman, right? If you're working those stacks, especially in zone game, if you're working, let's say you're the center, or well, in this case, you're the center, and you're working left and you have a backside one technique, you need to give a hand so your guard can cross his face, right? That's where a Davis and a Jenkins comes in. And then to get up to that second level, you want to be able to fit. You want your head on the outside of that guy's his outside shoulder, so you can get into him and get into your fit, and then drive him up the field. And then sometimes that is a little bit of a stalemate, but maybe you are just directing him horizontally versus more so vertically. In the inside zone, where I'm not so worried about guys like Bates and Shelton maybe being a little underwhelming in the inside zone game, is because you get the help of that guard more often than not. There's very few times he's going to be one-on-one with a defensive tackle. Even if he is working, even if it's a weak side run play and it's going to a one technique, that guard and he's going to get a little bit of help, at least from that guard, till he can get his helmet over and get into a proper run fit. And then if at that point it's a stalemate, that's okay. But I think really what you're trying to insinuate is, Bates needs to just get into a better run fit, especially at the second level with these next level defenders, because he has the ability to get there. It's just finishing the job.
Yeah, I think it's just giving a little pop when he gets in that fit, and giving a little being proactive, not reactive.
100%.
And I think that's something that just didn't quite sit right with me with the center tape. I didn't get into his guard tape. He only has 203 snaps at center in the NFL, so it's very limited. There's a comfort level that might be factoring in there. So I need to watch his guard tape still to see if maybe that's something that isn't as much of an issue as I felt like it was in the center tape. I was just really trying to get a feel for what Poles really loves about this guy.
Sure.
And I think if I'm looking at it very objectively, I think that what he loves about him is what I've been begging the Bears to do with offensive line for the last, 5 years of my life, which is attack athletes with positional versatility. Bates
Mm-hmm.
has 200 snaps at center, 300 snaps at left guard, almost 1,000 snaps at right guard, almost 100 snaps at left tackle, and 50 snaps at right tackle. That's something I can get behind. That's
Yeah.
something that I don't know if I love it as my starting center at 28 years old, but I do love that versatility and that athletic profile is there. So I mean, if he's the starting center, I can live with it. If he's your super utility backup, I actually love it.
If Ron Luce was 6'4" and 290 and ran a 4.940, that I would be Ryan Bates, because this is what I did in my playing career. I played every single spot on the line and just had that versatility, and that is a valuable thing when you have that guy, especially in the NFL where you aren't carrying a full 5-man unit behind your starters. You need that guy that can step in and play just about every position on the line, because you know maybe that keeps you from having to carry that eighth offensive lineman, and you can carry an extra special team or an extra receiver or something, versus needing that eighth offensive lineman because you have a guy that's only a swing tackle or only a center on the roster.
And then let's get to tackle, because I think we ran a little long on interior there. Darnell Wright, we all love him. We're all excited about his future. To me, I mean, I look at his graph here, and it's starts off really high and then moves down, starts to move down a little more, and then comes back up to end the year. It's almost exactly what I feel like I want to see, to a degree of like, started good, took some lumps, especially once you factor in the injury that he played through, took a
Yeah.
few more lumps, but then came back up and ended the season on a high note. Um, I think that he is lining up to be a very good football player for a long time for the Bears. And to me, really, the way that not just the fact that he played through that shoulder injury, like that's admirable. That's great. It's, rah, rah, football, tough guy stuff. But he found ways to get the job done despite being severely limited. And to me, that speaks louder than anything, any number you can throw out there, any tape that you can just like any clip you can point to, is that
Mm-hmm.
the fact that he went out there and found ways to win when he shouldn't be able to win. That is offensive line. Like that is
Yeah.
what you look for. That is a guy who just has it, and I am excited about it.
Yeah, I was at that Raiders game when he was playing through that injury, and getting to watch it firsthand was kind of fun, because you got to see some of the creativity with him as just an offensive lineman factor in. How was he getting in front of blockers? How was he using his hands to reposition players? It was a lot of like, he was just kind of doing what we used to call, when I was in college, just kind of the anchoring technique, where it was just scoot inside, get enough of a hand on the guy, because he's just a big burly grizzly bear. Let's be honest, he's huge. Just get enough of a pop and a pressure on that backside end so he's not able to make a play on the left side, and work through it. And then in the zone game coming to his side, it was a lot of work with the guy on that one side, push it off to your guard, and just get to the second level and get your big body in front of somebody, and give yourself a chance. I totally agree with you. I think even though it brought his numbers down, quote unquote, at that stretch, it just showed you what you have characteristically. Because offensive lineman is very much of a mindset. You have to be aggressive, but you have to be smart. You have to be agile. You have to be a lot of things to be an elite offensive lineman at the highest level. And Darnell Wright is showcasing a lot of those skill sets that I think, like you said, Bears fans should be excited about moving forward, because I think Darnell Wright's going to be a staple of the Chicago Bears team for probably the next 10 to 15 years if he continues to play like he did as a rookie.
There are some things in, like, maybe not necessarily football, but just in like in everyday life. It's like you can
Yep.
find a way to do something, and you can just do it that way over and over and stay successful. Blocking Max Crosby is not one of them.
No, it is not.
So when you lose an arm and you have to find ways to have variety, that's a very difficult task, and he was up to it. And
Sure was.
that stands out to me in loud capital letters. But Braxton Jones, I was so excited after week 1 about Braxton, because it was like, this guy played like he was outstanding. And that's one of the saddest parts about that Green Bay game last year. Both tackles played so well. Like I had Wright in a high 80s grade for that game, and I had Jones in a mid 90s pass block grade. The penalties killed his grade, brought down to a 70, but the fact that his pass block grade was that high was so promising to me. And I wasn't alone in that. Like I go to PFF, I'm pulling PFF up right now to see. I know that they were high on him after that game. They gave him an 89.9 pass block grade. Like, so I was eye to eye with them on what happened in that game with Braxton Jones. And it was just so promising, but he never hit near that grade again the rest of the season.
I wonder if some of that was just because of the nature of the injury he sustained and just not being able to get the full health in time. You know, he was out for quite a while, and I don't even think he was truly fully healthy when he got back. I think that really was just one of those instances where if you're Ryan Poles, you look at his body of work over the season and just go, that injury really, really hurt him. Like not just physically, but just in terms of development, in terms of so many other factors than just his play on the field and the time he missed. I think coming into this season, this will be, assuming he can stay healthy, this will be the body of work where we can finally say, hey, what is Braxton Jones as an offensive tackle in the NFL? And again, obviously a lot of that plays into staying healthy, but if he's able to stay healthy and even be 80% of what he was in that Packers game, the Bears are set at both tackle spots for the foreseeable future.
Yeah, and I mean, I'm at a point where I'm questioning how much of that is Braxton a guy that you really would feel comfortable paying, and he's going to answer that question this year, right? Like that's
100%.
That's not a question that needs to be answered now, but it's something that I'm hesitant to fall into, I guess, until we see something more definitive, because if the injury wasn't a neck injury last year, I could live with it more. But like I look at Teven, who had back issues and neck issues, and he lost some of his core mobility, some of his core flexibility. Braxton was not the same football player down the stretch last year. His core flexibility, his ability to turn and still have power to be reactive, it was much more robotic, right? It was much more my head is facing where my body faces. Like
he was Batman.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I was looking for. Yes, I was like, I know there's a reference for this.
He was Batman.
Yeah. And if he can get that flexibility back this year, awesome, great. It could go very far, but I start to worry about, what are the lasting impacts of that injury that could be there? Is it recurring? Because it impacted his play pretty heavily last year.
Same concern that we have for Teven Jenkins as well, right? So absolutely, a lot of questions to be answered here in year 3 for Braxton Jones.
Yeah, and then behind the two starters, you got the rookie 3rd round pick, Karan Emagaji. I don't foresee him playing much tackle this year unless one of these two starters goes down, then maybe you'll see him. But I could see a world where Teven or Nate Davis go down. You don't want to mess with who's starting at center if it's Bates, and you say Karan can play guard.
Yeah.
And I mean, I think the most logical path there is, say, put Shelton in at center and put Bates at guard. But if I thoroughly understand the idea of like, hey, we don't want to mess with the center quarterback exchange. We want that chemistry to stay the same. Karan's going in at right guard because Nate Davis went down, or left guard because Teven went down, and we're going to see what we got in this kid.
Yeah, I think there's a real possibility of that too, because especially for this year, right? Maybe he's a guy that fills in at guard, but maybe down the road, maybe he is the heir apparent to Braxton Jones at left tackle if Jones isn't fully healthy. I think Amagaji's ability to be nasty, like you saw it on his film, he has good placement of his hands for how big he is and how long he is. I think he's absolutely a guy that can use that skill set, kick inside, and do a good enough job as a first-year rookie at the next level, and then, again, potentially continue building into that. Maybe it's a tackle of the future. But again, having that versatility that we talked about, right? Of being able to play multiple spots is going to be so crucial for this team moving forward.
Interesting though. As you're saying that, I'm just thinking the most ideal thing for Amagaji is probably not playing this year.
Agreed.
And just getting the coached up on hand technique, hand placement, hand speed. I think hand speed is going to be very key for him to speed up, because some of his punches I felt like were late and were slow to get out, had a bit of a wind up at times. And if he's playing guard, I could see it becoming a Kyle Long type thing where he is just relying on his body and his frame to block people and never quite gets his hands right. I think getting a full season of him not fixing, but growing his hand technique can go a long way towards his prospect as a tackle, whereas throwing him in at guard might just result in him being a guard because he never gets that hand technique right.
Yeah, incredibly well said. That is exactly my thought with Amagaji this year too. Is his best case scenario is he doesn't play at all.
Mm-hmm.